Samhita is a practicing interior designer based in Ahmedabad. Being a creative director of a firm studio, Sāgā, she is an academic enthusiast and inclined towards Indian culture, sculptures, Vedic Sanskriti, along with architecture and history. She has a master's degree in design from Edinburgh Napier University, Scotland, and a Bachelor of Design from SEPT. So we are co-alumnus of the SEPT University. Samhita is currently pursuing her PhD in design education, with her subject being role of education and cultivating values as socially responsible interior design in India. Samhita will be talking about museum design, creating memorable, meaningful spatial experiences. Over to you, Samhita.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll just start with my presentation. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. So, yes, namaskar. First and foremost, I would like to thank Kedareshwari ma'am, my deepest gratitude towards her, for granting me this opportunity to present alongside our esteemed dignitaries. Thank you, ma'am, for your trust and confidence in me. I'll try my best to do the justice to the subject. The topic of my research, as ma'am has said, is museum design, creating memorable, meaningful spatial experiences. In my presentation, I'll start by discussing my inspiration for the research, outline its aim and objectives, and then cover some key theoretical findings. Followed by this, I'll present the main research findings and conclude with some inferences and a summary about how do we create memorable experiences in museums. I would like to start by asking all of you one thing, that just write down one word in the chat box, whatever the first word comes to your mind, about what was your most memorable experience. Like the first thing that comes to your mind. So I can see something in the box. Nothing big and fancy, just the first things that actually
Except Nikya, Chatur Bhagadilabo.
Yes, thank you so much. So, is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I cannot see the screen. Are we on the same slide? What your museum memory is?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the wonderful responses. We have history and we have stories and we have stone sculptures. I'm just amazed by the answers that people have. Now I'll just move on to what I feel the power of museum is. And my memory of a museum from my previous visits that I had, for a very long time, I carried a general memory of museums being lengthy walks, objects with similar information, very intimidatingly huge halls. And quite honestly, I often found myself very unsure of what to do and what to make of all that information. The museum visits for me those days really happened something that one should do and never knew why. I'm not sure if anyone else has felt the same way. The museums that you're seeing on screen right now are some of the ones that I visited. They are very popular tourist destinations in their respective cities. The Kite Museum in Ahmedabad, it's an iconic landmark building, displays kites from around the world. The Government Museum in Madikeri, Fort Karnataka showcases archaeological remains of that region. The Hall of Heroes in Udaipur houses paintings and information about the Mewar kings, as well as the models of Chittorgarh and Kumbhalgarh forts. The Vichar Museum in Ahmedabad is the only museum of utensils in the world, displaying all the utensils from various eras, and is also an extension of a very popular, the most loved fine dine Gujarati food experience. Despite the diverse contents, these museums often share very similar and almost a standard way of displaying objects with some basic bit of information next to it. However, they, in my opinion, they fall short in creating compelling spatial experience. Now, let me share my first memorable experience that had a lasting impression on me of a museum. First time I visited Swaminarayan Akshardham Museum in Gandhinagar, I was completely amazed. The lifelike setups, immersive lighting, sound, smell, along with a very well curated guided journey through the galleries, which made 4 hours of my day extremely incredibly enjoyable and fun. Many scenes are created in such a way that visitors actually sit amongst the exhibits and become a part of the scene when the audio narrations or descriptions are going on. And from a very humble display, a sudden shift comes with a large screen where everyone is looking at the portrayal of the personality of Bhagwan Nilkant. And it actually, the space is crafted in a way that it uplifts your emotion to a great deal. And the last gallery that has the most impactful impression is the final stage of divinity that they show in the life of Bhagwan Nilkant. And the actual space also has a similar effect on you. The main display features a music performance depicted through an animation scene. The cool breeze swept through and the peace and tranquility in the environment, very calming and divine voices, creates a very serene experience. The lights get dimmed down slowly and casting a warm and soothing shadow and glow on the objects there. There's a very beautiful soft bhajan which plays in the background, and they have synced the lip movements and the instrument movements and nodding of the display objects in the forefront actually. So it just makes you feel like you are a part of that actual performance in that museum, like it's a live performance for you. So I was completely stunned and zoned out with the pin drop silence after the performance there, and it has really exemplified the power of museums for me personally. Which brings to my forming of a research question. Like, since that museum visit, I have had the opportunity to visit numerous international and national museums, ranging from Modera Sun Temple Museum to Louvre in Paris. And as an interior designer, my curiosity has only grown regarding what distinguishes certain museums as true works of art, while the others remain really neglected and not so attractive despite their impressive collection and rich history. So while content and curation are undeniably crucial, equally important is how that content is actually delivered and expressed, as well as established in the presentation we saw yesterday, that making museums more engaging is actually the time of the need. So I started by asking, how can the implementation of spatial design principles contribute to enhancing visitor experience in Indian museums? The aim of this research is to explore how spatial design can contribute in the enhancement of the experiences. And the objectives that I've set down are basically starting from understanding the current state of Indian museum and spatial design, through examining relationship between the object, the visitor, and the museums. I've studied I've done some case studies to actually understand how renowned museums create this impact worldwide, and then come down to proposing some suggestions or recommendations for how we can actually do it in our Indian context. The first two objectives are done through literature review and then case study, followed by the inferences. I will start by actually talking about my findings on the current state of spatial design in Indian museums. So the state of spatial design in Indian museums really varies widely. Like the Swaminarayan Akshardham Museum we discussed about are renowned for immersive dioramas and multimedia sensorial experiences, versus others such as the Indian Museum in Kolkata have rich collections but lack some modern elements, or leading to a more traditional experiences which are really dialing down with the time that are passing. Newer institutions like Kiran Nadar Museum of Art in New Delhi, it prioritizes dynamic and interactive designs. While some museums excel in innovative spatial design, many could actually benefit to remain relevant and engaging in today's evolving landscape as well. I would just give you a very fun, simple example that these are the two toilet museums in the world. The one on the left is Sulabh Shauchalaya Museum in New Delhi. We have the richest collection of actually toilets starting from the beginning of it till Raja Maharaja and the way they use their toilets to the newest modern ones. Versus the one in the right is the one toilet museum in Japan. The difference is basically about how it is displayed and portrayed. So the museum in Japan actually is creating an experience. I don't know what is the feeling of that experience actually, but there is something for the visitor and the viewer to do and go through as an experiment. If you see the richness of the toilets that we have actually in our collection, they are really going unnoticed because I personally feel the way they are put together. And there could be something really interesting done with it. A very, very simple subject, but we see the difference in how it is designed. So when it comes to the museum designs, I understand there are many limitations also in terms of fundings and initiatives and the size and the content and the spaces which are with us. But I also feel that a backup of vision, a little bit of exposure and rapid transformation is really required for our museums to transform and become really a showcase of what they actually are in terms of their content. In the recent year, there has been a great shift in the way museums are designed, but coincidentally, through my research, I figured out that more of the private museums and independent museums are actually are going through that shift rather than government museums or the public museums, which are actually more accessible to people. They are still struggling with that shift through time. So the study actually shows that the scope of Indian museums in today's time is extremely vast and diverse, which reflects the country's rich cultural, historical, and artistic heritage. They house invaluable collections of artifacts, specimens, paintings, historical documents that span millennia of our Indian civilization. And as we have a very rich history of all the invasions and actually transforming through time since Vedic ages till today, in content, I think we are unparalleled with anybody in the world when it comes to one nation having so much content to display. Our museums can also serve multiple purposes of being in education centers, research centers, who are centers for preservation and cultural enrichment. They play a very crucial role in preserving and promoting our heritage, fostering national identity, and contributing to a global understanding and appreciation of Indian history and culture. Like the ma'am had mentioned yesterday, Anita ma'am, that Indian visitors and tourists actually don't seem to have that much of a value or an understanding of what we actually present to the world. So I think when our museums become the academic centers that way, that awareness and that interest can also be generated with time. For the purpose of this study and to better understand the experience creation as a process, all the places where time is transformed into a space are the ones that are taken in account as museums, regardless of their size and shape and form. If they're indoors, they're outdoors. This is just about creating an experience. Now I'll actually move down to some theoretical frameworks which are demonstrated for creating museum design. These theoretical frameworks actually provide valuable conceptual framework for analyzing, critiquing, and innovating in the field of museum design, informing the development of exhibits, interpretive strategies, and spatial environments that really engage, educate, and inspire the museum visitors. I would not go in the details of all of them, but to explain a few which are actually relevant to my subject is like the visitor experience framework actually focuses on enhancing the holistic visitor experience through sensory engagement and emotional connection. So establishing that connection, which is emotional with the visitor, becomes really important. And this framework actually demonstrates the importance and how it can be done. Another one is environmental psychology as a framework, which investigates the psychological effects of museum environments on visitor behavior and their emotions, which actually helps us understand what can be created as a space which will affect or have an impact on visitors, how and why. Another one relevant to the subject is the framework of experience design, which talks about creating immersive and transformative experiences through storytelling and interaction design. As the content of our objects is extremely important for us, similarly, the importance of storytelling, narration throughout the space, and how visitors interact with it becomes extremely important. Now, I'll actually move down to talking about the elements which are important in museum design. In a very fundamental sense, as we can see in the image also, the first set of elements for any spatial design project are the elements of space making, such as floors and ceilings, walls, all the other vertical surfaces, structural members such as beams, columns. And one more to add to it is the volume that we have around us to be used as a space for creating an experience. If I talk about how the elements play an important role, is that they are actually driven by the why and the what of the museum design. Like, what are we actually expressing and why are we doing it will actually guide how do we do it through design. And to mention a few elements of design for museums and spatial experiences are the layout and spatial flow, which talks about spatial configurations, architectural features of that space, the exhibit layout, and how one moves through beginning to the end of any exhibition or a museum in a permanent or in a temporary sense. Another important aspect is use of another important aspect is the color, lighting, and the sound effects of that particular space. How do we use them to empower the situation and the content narration that we intend to do? Display techniques and the presentation styles also have a very, very important role. Symbolic, cultural, and social dimensions to it actually reflect diverse narratives through thoughtful spatial organization, as well as interactive and multisensory experiences, and the way installations and the displays are created actually plays a very important role. One thing that I would like to mention here is that in the recent times, whenever the discussions on museums happen, we have actually shifted our focus on creating a very multimedia tag-savvy interactive display, which not necessarily is the only way to go about making the objects and the display interactive with visitors. There are a lot many activities and engagement exercises that can also go alongside with the other display methods. And when we actually talk about having digital displays, the immediate discussion goes onto the budget and the execution of it. But I think if we just shift from that and actually explore more physical objects as well, they are in the true sense more engaging and exciting for the visitors as well. Some other important elements of design which actually come from the content and the why and how of it.
तुम आवाज मारना मुझे थोड़ा सा.
There, the interpretation and storytelling strategies, the accessibility and inclusivity in design, also the environmental aesthetics, the wayfinding and signage systems of the museums, the spatial comfort, the temperature in the space, the crowding versus the open space ratios, and some environmental stresses as well. So all of these together actually govern and set the stage for us to how the museums are to be designed. Some of the elements, as I mentioned earlier, also are accompanied by a few other elements which actually come and are guided from the visitor experience itself, like how visitors interpret the entire museum and the space, how visitors navigate through it, what is the effect on their emotions and cognition as an experience for them. How do we address social interactions, dialogues, and collaborative learning in that existing space as well? Considering social, political, and economical context and addressing the games of power and representation and privilege, how do we find our way through all of these factors to actually give the visitor for what they've come for? And not the last but not the least, how do we promote inclusive, equitable, and socially responsible museum practices, which are fun and entertaining and also socially responsible for in all our senses? Visitor experiences are actually also defined by a certain categories, which deal with the exhibits and displays and the way of the quality of it, the varied and well curated learning experiences through those displays and exhibitions that are created. Touchscreen, multimedia, hands-on activities which actually increase the interactivity between the visitor and the museum. Immersive environment fosters deeper engagement and exploration. Some education and interpretation level strategies include clear labels, signages, audio guides, guided tours, which help visitors understand the exhibit's significance in education programs. Another important thing I would like to mention here is that one of a very key important factor I feel which museums face in terms of engaging the visitors is that visitors are not really aware or educated about why is that museum or the content that is being shown is important for them to learn. If they actually learn and if they actually feel their own connection to that particular museum content, I'm very, very sure that the museums do have that power to bring in a lot of visitors. I think the disconnect between the content and the visitor is also a very a very, very important aspect that I've actually discovered through this is the museum design process can be seen as a choreography. The visitor interaction and the context of experiences play the leading role. Like, who is the visitor? Why are they visiting? What do they know about the story? Some baseline information about the needs and expectations. Can I actually ask everyone to please mute themselves? Thank you. Make design of a museum is actually about bringing these messages and stories, context, and their experiences, their interactions actually come to life, which will eventually leave a lasting image in their minds. Now I'll actually quickly move through some of my case studies. I'm very, very sure that everybody has seen and known these museums. I'm just trying to understand a few museums in terms of if they are content oriented, if they are design oriented, if they are space oriented, or if they're actually concept oriented. So we started the Bilbao Museum in Spain, which is designed by architect Franco Gehry. It was actually something, the museum is developed on a dockyard, and it represents the fish skin and scales in their exterior, as well as the shape actually tries to resonate with the shape of a boat. The interesting aspect is that however beautiful the spaces are from outside, they've actually tried to take it through the interior space as well. The scale and the play of light and shadow and the scales which actually transform from a very tall to a small one, they themselves start creating impact on the visitors' minds. On the other side, there's a museum of like Shanghai Science and Technology Museum, which is a pioneer museum in the way they have displayed technology and interactions in their museum. The scale again here actually from very historic natural element to the most unique display object, which is the USP of this museum is a piano playing robot. There are many, many interactive elements like that, but they have also managed to showcase a very standard, what do we call, the objects which actually need description and a basic lighting for preservation and everything is also kept alive. A museum is not, in my opinion and in my study right now, it's not about actually making the entire museum like a game, but I think some interactive and some interestingly put forward elements along with our standards display techniques also work as long as the visitors are getting some fun and excitement about the museum visit. It remains worth a visit. The Metropolitan Museum of Art actually has varied scales and types of displays. The most popular view that we know is the entrance foyer with huge artisan galleries, but they have also created replicas of our historic elements, caves and Egyptian statues in the museum. If you see throughout the four images, you will see the difference in the way the display is happening, changing with the scale of the objects and the clustering of the objects. The ones which need an individual emphasis are actually kept aside on a separate pedestal, versus when you're talking about community and clusters, they are put together for a cohesive understanding for the visitors. A very, very popular, the Vatican Museum in Rome. I think it's a museum which actually doesn't need any designing per se, because the building itself is a museum and a display. It displays the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci and the biggest artifacts in the history that we have seen. These are the museums which are basically content-driven museums. So with a very good-looking building, the content is displayed through without much of an effort. And when visitors visit these museums, they're also not really looking for the interactive part a lot. It's content, and the importance of it actually takes precedence over anything else. A similar case is the Louvre Museum in Paris also. By creating the pyramid structure in the front of the palace, they've actually achieved a beautiful light rendition on the objects which are displayed under the structure. The structure has become an iconic display and a museum in itself for the city, which is a city landmark. The very unique thing about this museum is that they have actually used colors in a way that actually enhance the effect of the paintings as well as protect the visual chaos. And it really helps the museum become a more attractive space. If you see the image on the left bottom, if the wall colors were left white as the ceilings are, it would have become a very standard non-attractive object. But a very simple addition of a color and the floor plate being little different than the very plain space, it really does the trick. This is a twist museum designed by architect Bjarke Ingels in Norway, which is a conceptual museum designed between the ridge and actually brought the twist in the build form itself to connect the two ridges. The museums which are architecturally strong, they actually end up having a beautiful impact in the interiors as well, because the space itself gives a certain direction for the artifacts in the museum to be interesting. If you see the bottommost image, there is no actually display needed, but the feeling of the twist of the space itself is a display there. The Guggenheim Museum in New York is a very classic example of what a museum can be in a smaller space, but the way the vertical display is set up as an entire ramp from beginning to end, giving exits on the various galleries from the ramp itself. And the ramp also hosts a lot of displays. Is a very classic example of keeping the visitor engaged throughout, because there is no flat surface that you actually relax and sit. You always are in the movement because the ramp of the floor guides you to do so. The Normandy American Cemetery, my mistake, it's not in Paris. They have 2-3 different types of user engagement elements. So if you see the bottom image is the interior of it, and actually the displaying the death of a lot of soldiers in certain war times is very classically displayed. But if you look at the cemetery part of it, this particular garden is viewed from a floor level angle from the interior as well. And if you're standing there and looking at the cemetery, actually you feel like you are a part of that effect, which really amplifies the death and the overall impact of that entire event on a visitor's mind. However, the curator of that particular project has very nicely mentioned that when we design museums, along with creating experiences, there is a certain level of sensitivity required in the designers and the creators, that how far do you push those emotions of the visitors? So if you are actually engaging them to feel a certain aspects of that entire event that is being displayed, but you make sure that you don't push it so far beyond that it becomes not a museum but a tragic reminder of the tragedy. Another classic example is the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Berlin, which is designed by architect Daniel Levinsky. This particular museum is an extremely controversial museum in terms of its existence and design. And this is one museum that I have actually visited personally, many of them actually, but this one museum really had an impact on my mind as a designer. Because starting from the floor plate angle to the layout of the museum to how the exile and the axis of exile is demonstrated through light on the top, with a certain actually experimental patches where you get to experience the light, the trauma, the color, the claustrophobic sensations with their stories, culminating in a very straight hallway, which actually leads to salvation in the Holocaust story of it. So I think as a designer, this museum has a lot of takeaways for me and for everyone, that how elements of space making like light and color, the narration, the storytelling, the floor, the ceiling, the vertical surfaces, all aspects of a space can actually come together and choreograph that experience for the visitor. This was something very important and interesting as an experience for me to mention here. It is not an indoor classic museum, but it's a museum which was a temporary one created in Scotland in 2012 called the Enchanted Forest. So they have taken up a section of an entire forest and actually lit up in many different ways with some sound effects along that entire guided journey. When you see the topmost images, they both are the same space, but differently lit, and hence when you pass through that space it actually makes you feel different, and it stops the entire museum and exhibition from being a monotonous one. So you want to repeat and get into it for multiple visits. Now, I would like to mention these two things last at the end of it, that it's a Boston Tea Party Museum where the yeah, just concluding.
Reservation
So
of the
the Boston Tea Party Museum actually is designed, it's a very small museum just focused on one particular event, designed in a very small space where you enter and they actually make you become a part of that audience as if you are a member of that particular incident when the Boston Tea Party happened. They actually dress in their appropriate attires from that time zone and they talk in the same language. They take you through all the incidents. They created the environment in a similar way, like they whisper to make it a very secret meeting. They tell you to move through one space to the other. Don't talk to anybody. Don't share this information. They come and give you random information telling you don't share it because you are an important part of the historic development in American freedom fight. It actually culminates at the end in a harbor on a ship where they actually make you throw the dummies in the water, telling you that you have now become a part of the freedom movement by actually expressing your rebellious feelings with us, which as a personal experience, I actually felt that it was very engaging and very exciting for the visitors to be connected. I had nothing to do with that event as a person, but after going through this space, it actually made me much more connected to the content as well. My last case study is about a John Knox Museum house in Edinburgh. John Knox, as a person, a very historically significant person who is significant in a very specific way, not really the way we have historic content, but the way the house is on a display. In the middle, you see the space where he used to study and discuss and have meetings, important ones in their life story. And they allow you actually to dress up like one and, write or be there for a minute or for some time. And trust me, it actually makes you really feel that you're a part of that time and that era. And you start to understand how that person lived, what was the light condition, how they used to work, what did they used to use. In a similar house, a very interesting case presented is about the signage design aspect as well. So if you look on the right side, it talks about follow the turnpike stair, turn right at every door. It's basically about telling you to beware of the short height span of the stairs, and there is an exit to a gallery on every right turn at a landing. But instead of writing it in a very plain blank way, they've actually managed to use that the folks at that time had shorter heights and the ceilings were also low. So the tall folks should actually be beware of this. There is a standard signage which says mind your head, but this particular aspect really makes it interesting. The bottommost signage also is one of the signages in the Glasgow Museum, which is it's a very slight twist in the way we show lavatories in museums and in public spaces. But this was something which has stayed with me in my head for almost 12 years now, because the very, very sensitive aspect of grasping how a human thinks and works in a similar situation and making eye-catchy signages which are easy to read makes the museum experience really the scale becomes very easy and accessible for the visitors when the signage is done right. With all of this, I would like to conclude my talk by actually saying that we as designers and we as a country really have the scope of creating unforgettable experiences, because we have the content which is so culturally and heritage-wise rich, and our country is so vast and going through so many experiences on daily basis, which can have all sort of experiences we want. We have curious audience who wants to know what is happening. And in an interesting era where we live, one important thing I would like to mention, and I will end my talk, that museums when started and in their time, they were the only sources of actually giving a glimpse of the history and what things used to be. There was no other place, only other than the written records. People depended on the museum, and they were the preservers of the history and artifacts and all the important data. Now that the times have shifted for us and the information is available in abundance in all platforms, museums cannot remain the same information giving spaces. One, we need to create museums in a way that it really inspires a person to get up from the home and actually go and visit the physical space. So the elements of design in museum and the content creation and the goal and intent of the museum needs to change for it to be really engaging, immersive, and give a meaningful and memorable experience for the visitor. So having gone through this very interesting study and being an interior designer, I do get that urge of taking all the museum and create them wonderfully. But yeah, I think it's an emotion that I'm stating here, that let's craft unforgettable experiences that last for us, last for a lifetime and stays with us forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samhita. That was a very interesting presentation and bringing the question of spatial design and design in general in the area of museums. Unfortunately, we've shot the time over a little. So unless there is a pressing question, we will move on to the next speaker. All right, I'm not getting anybody to ask any. So we move to the next speaker, Dr. Kanika Mondal. Is she here? If you could just give a little shout out. I don't see you here, so.
Yeah,
Dr.
she's
Kedar?
having some technical glitch. She's trying
Okay.
her best to join us. She's
So-
in contact.
Yeah.
Since we have some time before,
Yeah, yeah.
I would just like to congratulate Samhita. She was on board with
Thank
me
you,
when
ma'am.
we were planning the Maritime Museum, which is coming up in Lothal. We had designed and submitted the design plan, and we had come out third in the design concept. Of course, the Hafiz contractor won it from Bombay. Second was Omnipolis, who designed Amravati, and we were third because of some financial technical glitch. We had to 1 minute. I'll just take this call. It's from Kanika. Hello. Wait, I'll give it to sir. Just try talking to it. Can you try it? Help it, Kanika. She's not able to join. So that's the time I met Samhita really. But when I saw her passion for culture and heritage, we followed the same path. But it's a marvelous presentation. Being an international conference, your slides were wonderful, international, colorful, and it kept me engaged. Yes,
Thank
we
you,
have
ma'am.
to create museums with experiences. The Enchanted Forest reminded me of that net, centering that tree for their fashion design exhibition.
Yes.
So, of course, that entry was $75,000 for that particular museum, that show. And last year it was $50,000. And in India, I used to get calls, can you allow me free entry? And the ticket was 20 rupees. So that's the kind of difference. People don't mind spending money on a bottle of chilled Coke or something, but when they come to museums, it is different. But when you go abroad, again, they're ready to spend those dollars and pounds to visit museums. But I must tell you that we have also made great strides in design and all, but because of certain limitations, we have very little special experiences. But I must say, what you mentioned, that the richest content is with India. That is very true. We have the richest, like Singapore had this jackfruit, experience. That experience was, then the experience is just you have to go to the jackfruit orchard and pluck jackfruits. In India, in every village, there are jackfruit. But that's the way they have, made it so important and significant.